But let's go through some of those common seller questions here. So how does your program work? That's probably the number one most commonly asked question that I get from sellers. To keep it very short and sweet, and again, I like to keep the questions very short, sweet, and to the point, because the less talking I do, the more talking the seller does, letting me know what questions or concerns they have. And that should be something that should be in the back of your mind as you're communicating, whether with buyers or for sellers. If you're doing most of the talking, you're missing out, because the more you talk, the less likely they're going to be to work with you. It's just a rule of selling. I don't know. That's just how it works, right? Let the seller be the one who's asking the questions, or let them be the one who is expressing what their problem is, right? And really, the only communicating that you should be doing is, pointing out how what you do solves that problem. So how does your program work? Getting right to the point, what I'll say initially is our program is basically designed to help sellers who are perhaps having a difficult time selling their properties in today's market, and helping buyers who are having a difficult time buying, whether it's because they have some credit issues that they need to overcome, or they have, or maybe they're self-employed. Credit isn't always the issue for the buyers not being able to purchase. But basically what I've done is I've designed a program to help bridge the gap between those two, because up until now there really hasn't been any solutions. So for sellers, it helps alleviate, the burden of, having to make monthly mortgage payments, or if they're having a problem selling their property, if it's just sitting. And again, I catch myself, like even now I'm kind of rambling because I kind of want to get to the point for you guys. I want to express that. But the reality of it is, how does it work? We find a tenant buyer who is interested in purchasing your property. We'll screen them. We'll have them talk to a mortgage lender, and then show your property. If they're interested in your property, we'll put together what's called a lease purchase proposal. And what that means is they will lease your property for a set period of time during which they can purchase it, often at a predetermined price. And honestly, that's probably pretty much all I'll say at that point, because the seller is going to have more questions, right? And just so you know, there are probably a total of like 10 to 15 questions, and most sellers ask any variation of those questions. So once you've got those down, like, you're done. And I've got most of them here. How much do you charge? That's a great question, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller. If you list your property with us, typically our fee is 3%. But so you know, how that works is we'll actually add our fee to your bottom line. So we need to find out, basically let me know what it is that you need to net, what your bottom line is, and we'll add that to your fee. And realistically, it's paid by the buyer, because the buyer is the one who's bringing in the down payment option deposit, and that's how we get paid, right? Or I'll even say something to the effect of, well, actually, our fee is paid by the tenant buyer, right? Even though it gets deducted, like, they don't need to know all of the details right up front. Like, they basically are asking, what's it going to cost me? And the reality of it is if you can just address that concern, that really it doesn't cost you anything, because one, I'm adding my fee to your bottom line, and two, the buyer's bringing it through their down payment option deposit. That's going to handle their concern. So next, what happens if they don't buy the home? So this is one that's pretty common. Not the most common, but it's obviously a concern. If they don't purchase the property, they're basically out their down payment option deposit. And, I like to let both the buyer and the seller understand that, there's risks involved in the transaction. And I'll tell the seller that as I'm answering this question, that there are risks involved with doing these types of transactions. I mean, even though we have a great success ratio on completing these sales, in fact, I just had yesterday, I had a conversation with a tenant buyer who actually put $15,000 down on a property back in April of 2011. And they lost their job, right? And they just got hired, but it's like in Canada. They're moving. They have to relocate. And they basically just don't really have any other options. Now, they understand that that their option deposit is non-refundable at that point. Mostly they were contacting me to see, okay, what kind of options do we have? And they're more coming from a position of, we feel bad for the seller. I mean, their main concern wasn't even the down payment that they put down. Obviously, they were wondering, is it possible that they could get any of that money back, right? And so let's just address that. So I let them know that, first of all, it is non-refundable. So they understand that basically they're not owed anything if they're walking away from the transaction. However, we could communicate with the seller and see if they would be willing to allow you to assign your interest to another tenant buyer, right? Like, that's getting a little creative. And on their contract, they have about 1.5 years left on it. So if they could technically find a tenant buyer to replace themselves, then it's possible that they could receive a portion of that back. Now, obviously, that tenant buyer would need to be replaced or be approved by the owner, but it's possible. And that's obviously something that's going to be run by the sellers and see if that's even something that they would consider. But the buyer does know that really at this point, they're forfeiting that down payment option deposit. And that's what I just let the seller know. I just let them know that, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen because people still get divorced. They still lose their jobs. They still, get injured. For whatever reason, there's still going to be a percentage of your deals that don't end up successfully turning into sales, closed sales. Next question here. Oops. What happens if the tenant buyer stops making payments? So again, I usually reassure the seller that before we even put them into a property, I, as the agent, take on, I take on kind of the principle that I don't put anybody into a property that I wouldn't put into my own property. So first and foremost, they've got to pass our initial sniff test, meaning, we're going to screen them. They fill out our application that we will review and scrutinize. After we've looked at the application, we'll forward that application onto a mortgage lender. The mortgage lender will then make a recommendation whether or not they feel like they're a good candidate. And not only that, but the owner is welcome to do any additional due diligence that they feel necessary, whether that means background check, credit, also review the credit, talk to the mortgage lender. So we mitigate the risk of the tenant buyer being a flake and stopping making the payments altogether. And in fact, I've really, over the last 3 years, only had a couple scenarios where that's happened in the last couple of years, and I'll let them know that. I mean, I don't want to paint a picture like it's not possible, because it certainly is, but it's less likely that it would happen. But in that event, again, I mean, typically, if it's a lease option transaction, it's still a landlord-tenant relationship, right? So my suggestion to the owners is the day that the payment is late, they send a 3-day pay or vacate notice. So meaning, if it's due on the 1st, late by the 6th, then on the 6th, they're sending a pay or quit notice, right? And so that may vary depending on what state you're in, what that process is. Actually, I recommend that they do that through a real estate attorney so that they can handle that process. The real estate attorney that we use, I think they charge like $250 to start that process and to see it through, and then whatever additional costs may be incurred through that process for whatever reason. But my recommendation is to start that process, and I remind them of this after we place the tenant buyer. Now don't forget, if the tenant is late, send that the day it's late, because that way you're not losing any time. You're not losing out on any, you don't want to be like 30 days into this. Those of you guys who have either been property managers or have owned rental properties know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you don't want to be 30 days or 60 days late because you're buying into a story that, oh, my dog died and my husband left me, whatever the situation may be. Like, the mortgage company isn't going to buy into your excuses as to why you can't make the payment. They're just going to add on the late fee and, follow their own processes. So same thing here. And so I let the sellers know that, hey, basically, even though the likelihood is low that something like that would happen, we recommend that you take the precautionary steps to make sure that you're protected. Next objection or question that the seller would have: do you have a buyer who is interested in my house? Now that's kind of common because, if they receive my marketing message either by email or if I contacted them, they're wondering, okay, well, do you have a buyer for my house? Oftentimes, I don't have like a specific buyer for their property that I have in mind. Like I may have a buyer in my database who's interested in it, and I just let them know. I say, well, now again, if I'm communicating to a seller, or if I'm talking to them on the phone, it's typically because they received my email, right? That says I have buyers who I'm trying to find properties for. So, do you have a buyer who's interested in my house? Typically, my answer is I might. I send out the email because we have buyers looking in your area, right? And so, it's possible that I have a buyer for your property, but, the reason that you receive that email message is twofold. One, to see if it's a fit for one of the clients that we've already got in our database or that we're actively out showing properties to. And then two, if this is something that would work for you, if a lease option is a possible solution to your problem, then by allowing us to plug your property into our marketing channel, if there is a lease option buyer out there that would consider your property, that is the best way of finding them, is plugging them into our marketing program. And again, I mean, for some sellers, they only want to work with you if you have someone, right? But after highlighting some of the benefits of working with us through our program or allowing us to market their property, sending them back to our website, having them fill out the forms, it's a small percentage of people who, are like, well, only call me if you have someone for my house. Next question: what if they trash my house? Again, going back to, I don't want to paint a picture like there's no risk involved. Like, that's obviously a risk that exists. I've had one scenario in the last 3 years where the house basically got trashed. It cost about $2,000 to bring the, recarpet, repaint. It's a smaller house, but it happens. But again, looking at the ratio of how many deals we've put together to how many times it's happened, the possibility is low, but again, the risk does exist. I mean, that risk exists if they just lease the property. It certainly exists if, they're doing a lease purchase. And again, the seller has the right to do whatever due diligence they feel necessary. We like to believe that we not eliminate, but mitigate that risk as much as possible by doing the type of screening that we do up front as well. So, and how long before they can buy? I let sellers know, on average, our lease purchase contracts are anywhere between 12 to 24 months. I would say the average is probably somewhere between that 18 to 24 month range. We have contracts that go out as long as 36, even 48 months. And I've done deals before where we've done lease options that were that closed within 90 days, right? 6 months, and a year time frame. And a year, I let them know that a year is on the shorter end. If they need out of their property in less than 12 months, then our program, may not necessarily be a good fit for them, because again, most of our transactions are 18 to 24 months. And who manages the property during the lease option period? So I let them know. We set up the transaction through a third-party payment processing company. The tenant buyer is responsible for all the maintenance and repairs. So the need for a property management company is really eliminated, because with the collection of the rents and the tenant buyers taking care of the repairs, like, really, why would a property management company be needed? I let them know if that's something that they would like. We can certainly refer them to a property management company, but most of our clients, 9 out of 10 clients, don't see any value in hiring a property management company to do that. Next question is, what kind of contract do I sign with you? I let them know that this contract that they sign is a standard listing agreement. Because I'm a licensed real estate agent, I am required to use state-approved forms. And the only state-approved form that I have is a standard exclusive listing agreement that I add an addendum to. And what that addendum states is that the contract is non-exclusive, meaning that the owner still has the right to, lease or sell the property on their own without any fees or penalties. And it also outlines how I will get compensated when and if we do place a tenant buyer in their property. And that typically satisfies most sellers, because if they know that they can cancel the contract at any time, or that they still have the right to lease the property on their own or sell the property on their own without any fees or penalties, that pretty much puts that objection to bed right away. And I have some agents ask me, why would you allow them to still advertise or market the property? And simply put, I'm trying to get as many listings under my belt as possible. I'm not trying to create any obstacles or hoops that the sellers have to jump through. I want them to list their property, as soon as possible and as easy as possibly, right? Now, do I lose properties because they lease them on their own or they sell them on their own? Yes, I do. But I list far more, so the benefit far outweighs the drawback, right? And here's the other thing too. I will also make a special request of every listing that we take. And I would say 75% of the time, like 3 out of 4 sellers will honor this request. My request is that they allow me to market the property exclusively during at least the first 30 days, if they would allow me to do that. And I let them know that, for a couple reasons. One, it can send a mixed message if they're seeing my ads, because chances are they're going to be advertising their house for rent or for sale in similar places that I'm going to be marketing. And it's going to send a confusing message if they see the owner's property ad for their property for rent and then mine for lease purchase. Because oftentimes even if they have the money down, maybe they wouldn't put that money down if they knew they could just rent it. So I make that request to the sellers, and like I said, I would say 75% of the time they're totally cool with that. And I let them know after that 30-day mark, if you want to, I understand that you can't sit with this property vacant or you need to move or whatever the scenario, then that's great, But if they can't give me 30 days, I'll ask for 2 weeks, whatever I can get. And if they can't give me any, then that's fine too. We'll just market the property. So again, if you guys have got questions, use the question box, and then we'll get to those as we wrap up. Next question, common question that I get from sellers is, where's your office located? And this, I try to put them in order by how often I get asked these questions. So like, where's your office located? They're kind of wondering, are you local? Are you far away? Are you out of state? And I find it's, once I answer the question, it's really not an issue. And regardless of whether the property is far away from me or not, I would say over half of the properties that I market on our program are over an hour drive from where I'm at, right? And if it is, I just let them know, like, let's say their property is like an hour and a half away from where I'm at. I'll just say, yeah, my office is in Layton. Is that a concern for you? And if it is a concern, if they say, well, yeah, that's, an hour and a half away, I'll say, you know what, that's totally understandable why you would think that that might be an obstacle for us. However, because like 90% of our marketing is done online, we're able to reach buyers virtually all over the state. We literally have buyers in every market segment of northern Utah. So realistically, for us, it's not a concern. I really don't see why it should be for you. Do you have any other questions? And then, how much would you rent my house for? Typically, my answer to this is very straightforward. We obviously like to market it as low as possible on the monthly payment, because there's a direct correlation to the level of activity we can generate to the perceived value that they see in the monthly payment. So I let them know we'll typically do one of two things. One, either fair market rent or less, obviously, or your monthly mortgage payment, whichever is less, right? And And so we will allow them to choose at that point, what are you able to do? And again, reminding them that the more aggressive we can be on that monthly payment, the higher the likelihood that we're going to be able to find them a high quality tenant buyer in as short a period as possible. So those are the top seller questions.